It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza.
Hello, Irwin. I've got to perfect that. I'm sorry. I don't know. Hold on. Hi, Irwin. Was that not? That wasn't that.
It's funny. I got to tell you how funny it is you bring this up. Because I happened to, the other day, was taking a walk. I was listening to really an older podcast, and you gave me a greeting. To our listeners of Our Hamptons, the show tends to start with me just saying the word Esperanza. And then I always wait for Esperanza's retort. And it is very, very, it's got a good body of work. You've gone a lot of different directions with
varied,
it.
Diverse. Yes.
Very diverse. It was just sometimes just Irwin or something. Irwin, different modulations, a little sing-song sometimes, while I seem to stay true to the Esperanza, which I think our audience is expecting at this point.
I agree. And so I just like to surprise them. So there you go. That was my little, aside.
Exactly. And, this episode of Our Hamptons, Esperanza, I have to say, our mission is the history, the preservation, the sense of place. I mean, this particular topic will touch on all of those, but using a term, it's not ancient history, which this certainly isn't. But a lot of the things on Our Hamptons really have a much deeper and richer history. We've talked about families that are generational, the Whites,
right.
People here, the Bennetts, the Lesters, when we did the episode on Poseyville. Really much longer history than this particular place and individual has.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. Yes. But no less meaningful or impactful.
I would agree. And again, something we've touched on many times in Our Hamptons, is places about, you mentioned the fishers, the fishermen, the farmers, the baymen in the same breath as the Abex artists and everything else.
That's correct. That's correct. I would say that this particular story, though, is perhaps one that, about an individual that may not be as familiar to most people as part of this community.
That is absolutely correct. And really a visionary for the 20th century and even into the early 21st century. And I always say this, and why don't we start by telling our audience, we are talking about the place is Longhouse, 133 Hands Creek Road in East Hampton. But the story of Longhouse is really the story of Jack Lenor Larsen, depending on how you want to say it. But he's the brand of Longhouse. And yes. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And in the interest of full disclosure, look, Esperanza and I have both lived in this community for a long time. And Longhouse, I'm going to speak for Esperanza now, is a place we've loved. Would you say that's fair, Esperanza?
Yes, it is. Yeah. I mean,
so much
for many years.
Exactly. And so much so that I've been a volunteer at Longhouse as a docent for the past 2 years because I just love the place. And Esperanza, wearing one of her 78 hats. If you don't know Esperanza, I don't know how she pulls all this together, but God bless her. Esperanza is the head of education and community engagement at Longhouse. So we both are, connected. I do a little social media work for Longhouse as well, which is fun. But, we're both connected to the place because we love the place. And yes. It's something special. And we're going to try to share these stories with you. So I guess, Esperanza, we should really give a brief history, just touch on a couple of things about Jack Lenor Larsen. Now, we lost Jack a few years. Yeah, okay.
I mean, I'm sorry. I just have to say, because you and I know, and we'll get to this, but he wasn't somebody from here, and he not even from New York City. I mean, how he came here it's part of the story, I guess.
It is part of the story. He couldn't have come from farther away in a
Farther
sense,
away. Exactly.
I mean, he was born, again, we're not going to get delve too deep into, who Jack was. We'll touch on it, but because this podcast is called Our Hamptons, and we want to make it germane to that. But just to give a background, I mean, he was born 1927, child of the Depression. We're going to get into that, why I mentioned that now. An only child, lived in the Pacific Northwest. Actually thought he was going to be an architect out Esperanza.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Actually, went to school for that. And, one day after a couple of years realized, I can't draw, which we actually had architects that we did, had a show with those a Sabbath. We didn't get into those nuts and bolts, but I guess you have to be able to draw to be an architect, Esperanza.
I think, my issue would have been mathematically challenged would be my obstacle to becoming an architect. But, I think what's so notable about Jack Lenor Larsen is that he was not one to fit in a box, right? And so,
oh my gosh,
in a moment where, architecture would have made sense because it would have been a career that people were familiar with and sort of something that was, what do you call it? I'm trying to think. Anyway, but it doesn't matter. He found like building with, I guess you could say, threads or yarns or fabrics, or he studied textile weaving.
Exactly. And,
that's just incredible that he would do that.
That he found that. Now, to touch on what you just said, this is a quote, this is a quote when Jack was a boy. And he said, and we're going to get into some Jack quotes because some of the things he said, you think Yogi Berra had some good lines. I mean, Jack yes. Lenor Larsen was really, some of these were just fantastic. But as a boy, I was always building things. And I love this line, Esperanza. It wasn't to have places, it was to build places. And, it's amazing. Like the things you say as a child often come to fruition as an adult. And that statement really came true in a lot of ways for Jack.
Yes. And I mean, just seeing that, reading those words, hearing those words, there's no question. This was an individual who had a purpose, I think, from birth.
I would say that's true. And you touched on the textiles and again, I'm going to issue the disclaimer. What I know about textiles can fit into a thimble. Okay. I don't know much about this industry. I mean, yes, we could say it's upholstery, it's curtains, it's things of that nature, if you wanted to give a very broad kind of definition. But the thing about Jack and textiles was the ability to see something that essentially was flat in 3 dimensions.
100%. Oh.
Okay. I mean, a curtain is a curtain is a curtain. And again, I mean, we're not going to get into, I mean, this guy did work at, I think it was the Grace Building, I mean, in New York, or
Falling Water.
Falling Water.
Frank writes Falling Water.
I think even to the point of,
how many people know that?
That's right. I think even to the point, not exactly Falling Water, to your point. And even I believe like the first to certain kinds of upholstery in airlines, in airport, in airplanes, just
a pioneer all around.
I mean, my gosh. And by weaving, he was a weaver, and, he was a lot more than a weaver. He transformed an entire industry. I mean, had a solo. This is becoming a Jack Lenor Larsen history story, but it has to be.
He's the center of the whole.
Yeah, I mean, and lest we forget, he had an exhibition in the Louvre in Paris. I mean, come on.
Yeah, no. As you said, he transformed an industry worldwide. By the way, his impact is something. The issue, I guess, is that it's a this design world that is sort of insular in a way, and I guess. People might live with drapery and upholstery, but they're not really considering who thought up that design or who thought up that weave.
Completely true. And again, seeing something, and this is, I know when I do with Docent tour, this is a point I make all the time because, and we'll get into the garden at Longhouse shortly, but the textile, to see some, again, it's hard to wrap my arms around this, but I have to repeat myself, something flat in 3 dimensions. I mean, that was, and he really, he did this in the garden, he did this in the house, but we should push the story up to the East Hampton era.
Right, because he came to New York City in the 50s. I mean, he was like a product of the, he's the mid-century modern artist.
Completely,
right?
Completely true. And, he came to New York in the 50s. Now, remember, he was born in 27. So he was a young guy. I mean, and, he was in his, early 30s at the point, I guess, when he got here, late 20s, took an office in New York, but ultimately discovered East Hampton. And in 1965, so that would make him 38 years old at the time. In 1965, he came out and bought and created. Now, this is right next door to Longhouse, the current Longhouse, but he created Roundhouse, which was, I guess, his homage to an African village hut, if you will, or home.
Yeah.
And it was really to store. He had we'll get into the fact that he was an enormous collector and everything, but it was to store his collection of African art. I mean, and that's what he did. And speaking about his, his collecting, there is a really good quote about this, and I'm going to find it and I'm going to read it to you, because the collecting really started in Roundhouse. Let me see if I could find this in the outline about collecting, because it's really a worthwhile.
Yeah, I'm curious if it's, I mean, I remember reading something he said about it, it wasn't about collecting for the value, like it wasn't about value. Is that the quote?
The exact quote, exactly right.
Okay,
That's the gist of it. But it's then as now. This is Jack's own words, which we'll bring into play periodically here. Then as now, the characteristics in my acquisitions was not luxury or even quality in a usual sense, but they're existing outside the conventions I knew.
I love that. Like I said, I mean, the purpose in his vision in his life is incredible, but also the fact that he did not conform.
Oh,
it was about not conforming, really, and not in in any sort of rebellious way. It was just not being conventional. Why do something if if somebody else is already doing it?
Esperanza Leon Segwayer. Is that another one of your drops? But to that exact point, Esperanza, and we're gonna again. I mean, I love Jack's words. When I do a docent tour, Esperanza, I always bring in so many of Jack's quotes. Maybe too many, but it's subjective. There's no right or wrong. But to your point about conforming, in Jack's own words, conforming must be terribly dull. I never learned to do it. Or if
I love that he wouldn't learn to do it too. That's the thing.
He had no way.
Because you do learn to conform, by the way. That's exactly the right way
you get, you just go down a middle road.
We're not born that way to conform. We learn to conform.
Jack certainly wasn't, I'll tell you that.
Exactly.
I mean, and convention is such a waste of time. If someone has already done it, why bother?
I mean, I just channeled him
completely.
No, because these words are just something that that resonate with me without question.
And for those of you in the audience who haven't been to Longhouse, as great as these words are, it's actually when you're on the property at Longhouse that these words come into play.
Yeah, they come to life, really. Yeah,
totally come to life because, you talk about not conforming. When you first, I know, we really didn't get into Roundhouse. We're going to backtrack to Roundhouse. Roundhouse, and then we're going to get back into Longhouse. Roundhouse was almost like, Esperanza, I'm going to use this word. It was almost like Jack's laboratory.
I was going to say it was like an incubator. Yeah.
It really was an incubator. Yeah. That's even a better term, where a lot of what you would see on the grounds of Longhouse, Jack started at Roundhouse. Now, Roundhouse was 10 acres. Longhouse, which he bought 10 years later in 1975, this was 10 years after Roundhouse, was 15.4 to be exact. Okay, so it's a little bit, so it was 50% more land than Longhouse was. But when you go on the property, and I have had the privilege of being on the property at Roundhouse last year, and you will see the same kind of things, intricate pathways. Jack always made a path also, Esperanza, on a curve where, to add the sense of mystery, you couldn't see the end of the path. Curve.
I love
that. Some he did
Just
symmetrical,
full of surprise.
straight. Yeah, I mean, he would do a straight path if there would be something focused at the end of the path.
Like a sight line, yeah.
Rest your eyes on, common technique in landscape art design. But most of them, even the driveway, I've always marveled in Longhouse. You can't see the house by pulling in, and he was all intentional. I mean, everything is a curve to add to that mystery. But when you take these quotes into the context of being on the property, and we're going to give you a virtual Docent tour in a sense, you walk through the gates, and the first thing you lay eyes on is a dunescape. I mean,
it's so unexpected, and especially when you then learn the history of this parcel, or 16 acre, nearly 16 acres of land, which were formerly farmland.
That's correct.
I mean, this is, and please, understand, this is the sort of the beginning of Northwest Wood. So it's really woodland, and it had been overgrown, but at some point in the 19th century, I guess it had been farmland.
Completely true, yes.
As so much of this area was farmed.
Potato farm, actually.
Of course.
Right. You might have even had, well, I don't think there was a potato farm in your time. At the time you had you had your first potato at the Sea Spray Inn. See, we're at a point in our Hamptons, ladies and gentlemen, where we actually can reference these.
We reference our own shit.
So,
I presume that had been abandoned as a use, much for quite a long time. I mean, by the time he bought it, it was full of, and they're still there, these, large oaks and other native trees and shrubs, no?
Scrub oaks,
and
really.
scrub.
Scrubby, and another amazing segue by Esperanza, but to that exact point, and this is something I always mention when I do a Docent tour at Longhouse, and it makes it even more extraordinary because this was a 15.4 acres of formerly a flat as a pancake potato farm, but nothing but overgrown barberry and scrub oak and
bramble,
bramble. I mean, just it
to have the vision to transform that. And going back to the entry in the dune.
Exactly.
I mean, how you could consider just creating these different atmospheres, environments.
Yeah, and whenever I'm getting enthusiastic now. You probably hear it in my voice, and I do this on a Docent tour. I act like a 10-year-old.
I
really do.
I feel the same way.
I can't help it. I just get so excited about being on this property. Every time I go on this property, I smile every single time, and not only smile, Esperanza, just marvel at what this guy created, and the mind to see this 15-acre overgrown mess, which is essentially what it was.
Yes.
And to have the ability to conceptualize and what all he did. And to start with the dunescape, and we touched on the beginning of this episode, Esperanza, Jack being a child of the Depression. And it does play into it because
tremendously, yes.
Okay, because now remember
throughout the garden.
Throughout. I mean, well, believe me. And this is something I always talk about because I'm, I just marvel at it and I respect it also. This was, let's just say, this landscape and this garden is extraordinary. Now, Jack, would have told you right out, this isn't a botanical garden. This garden was about
let's make sure that's not. It's not like a full of specimens.
This exactly
not the focus.
This garden is not, in Jack's words, a botanical garden. It was never about that. I mean, don't get me wrong. The garden's extraordinary.
Yes,
and unbelievable. Up to 1 million daffodil bulbs in the spring. I mean, it's fantastic. But the point is, it was not his focus. The garden almost, to get into the whole textile thing, and again, we're jumping around because we just get excited, and I know we're doing that right now, but we will come back to the dunescape. But the garden was about the texture, the way light hits it,
Pattern. Yeah.
pattern, layers.
Yeah. Well, it was created by really an artist, not, somebody who engineered spaces, but, really created more organically. I know that word can be a little bit overused, but it really, I feel like that's the case, like, oh, this spot needs a shrub, we need to put something here and find, and going back to the collecting aspect, it was never about, finding that specimen that needed to, we need to have that in our collection here that cost thousands and thousands of dollars. No, let's buy these little $1 hemlock.
Totally true.
Right?
Yeah. There's, I think, 1,200 linear feet of hemlock that he bought. Great story. And the hemlock, which I don't know how they're doing this. Hemlock has a disease, but somehow at Longhouse they manage it.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's something called I'm going to mispronounce this, but it's something called the woolly alcalid or something.
Oh, yeah.
It creates a whiteness on the leaves. Somehow Longhouse manages it. But to Esperanza's point, the story she's telling is, I think Jack bought 12 or 1,400 linear feet. And the story goes, it was actually like a New York State Arbor Day promotion. He bought these things. They were like 4 inches high.
Exactly.
And he planted literally whomever he was working with, 1,400 linear feet, 4-inch plugs. I mean, 4 inches.
Yes.
And now they divide the property into a garden. They sort of segregate the garden.
And they're like 7 feet tall, I think, or something.
Amazing.
Yes.
Amazing. So a point of the story is, in a place, Eastern Long Island, where horticulture has always been important, but in a place of mad money, people often just bring in instant landscape.
Exactly.
Here they call one of the big, landscape firms. We won't mention them. You know who they are. And here's a blank check. Make it look like it's been here forever. This was not Jack Lenor Larsen.
No, it was a total, like,
he did
the patience involved with this, the vision involved with this.
And he always talks about that, how, patience. I am a weaver and a gardener. Both take time and patience. There's a quote. That's exactly, and that's exactly true. But getting back to the Depression era mentality.
Yeah.
When Jack was building Longhouse, now remember, he was, just again, the timeline. Roundhouse 65, bought the land for Longhouse in 75, didn't actually start building till 1986, late 80s.
And I understand, I mean, his purpose for buying, I mean, I guess the acreage was available, but it was, adding to what he already had. And I presume that vision of building something else, it came later again, it was really a whole process. It wasn't instant anything.
Nothing was instant anything. I mean, he did what he did at Roundhouse, apparently couldn't keep Roundhouse. I mean, maybe he needed the funds from Roundhouse to build Longhouse. I don't know. But the groundwork was laid there. And getting back to his frugality, when he was building Longhouse, now the timeline, Longhouse was built from between 86 and 1990, 91. It opened officially in 91. And again, we'll get into this later, but Jack's whole focus of Longhouse, it was going to be a foundation. It was going to be a gift to the community.
Yeah.
To the world.
I think that was probably again, purpose.
Yeah, that was the purpose. I mean, because that was his intended legacy. And since we lost him a few years back, it is his legacy.
Right. And I was going to say, it's probably why, it's sort of like he outgrew Roundhouse and Longhouse became the new laboratory, the new place where he would.
Exactly. It was just, it's who he was, Esperanza.
Yeah.
Whatever he created, he did Roundhouse. What's the next frontier?
What's the next? Exactly. Always changing.
Always changing, evolve. I mean, it's just, listen, we both have houses. I mean, I analyze how to plant a 6-foot bed of flowers, and this guy did something like this over 15.4 acres. It's just crazy. But
going back to the building.
Going back to this, he was digging the foundation they were digging. The foundation was being dug for Longhouse, the basement, etc. And he got cost estimates to cart away the soil that were
which is prime act. I mean, that was prime soil, by the way. So
yes,
total waste. Also,
it was prime soil, but meanwhile he had to put it somewhere.
Right, but what better place than keeping it on the property?
I mean, and it was almost. I mean, Esperanza, is it fair to say where others saw a dilemma, Jack saw an opportunity?
Yeah, it's so interesting because one would think, just finish the story. I'm like, okay. I'm just.
Do you see what happened? And Esperanza, I swear to you, I do this on the Docent tours. It's the same kind of thing. I mean, I get so enthusiastic. I don't know where to go. But Jack, seeing all this, when you dig a hole, you have a hill. And said to himself, living a few miles from the ocean, why not create a dunescape? But this guy didn't just create a dunescape. He made a dunescape with plantings and shrubs, native. And if you see the way it's planted, it literally will mimic, if you've been to the Walking Dunes or into Lazy Point or wherever, how plant life grows in a dunescape. Wind-swept, wind-blown, things growing out of the side of a dune,
right,
the top of a dune.
And suddenly popping up out of, I mean, like a volunteer,
completely true. He created that. This was not, hey, dump the soil over there and let's see what. This guy had a plan. Everything you see at Longhouse.
Purpose, again, purpose.
Purpose, yes.
Dynamic purpose.
I mean, and when you walk onto this property, you literally, if you block everything else out, you are in the Walking Dunes or in Lazy Point or wherever, because that's exactly what it looks like.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's just an extraordinary introduction to walk onto Longhouse to see that, and then, again.
I wanted to say and I said, continue with the story, but it was like my thought of some people would think that his vision was impractical.
Right.
And I would say, I mean, it couldn't be more practical, because by thinking in that way, a non-conforming way, he was finding solutions. I mean, this is what it is to be an artist, right? Is to find creative solutions for quote unquote problems. That dunescape, creating these berms, the hemlock hedges, and all of it relates to this place as well, and the origins of that land, the farmland. It's really, there's nothing without meaning. Let's put it that way, I think.
And to take what you just said and put it in Jack's own words. What an amazing segue you just gave me.
Another one.
Gosh, but
I'm getting really good.
You've really fine-tuned the segue. How about, Esperanza? Let's look at what could be done, what hasn't been done. Because I don't know about you, but I've been to a million properties over the years. I've never seen a dunescape on one of them.
No, that's true. That's true. And if I have, which right. I think there may be one, it actually, in my mind, if I recall correctly, was inspired by Jack's Dune.
Yeah. Okay. I will definitely, I will definitely go with that. And interestingly, there is a part of Roundhouse that's all sand. And there on it, now I don't know if this is Jack or the current owner, but right on top of it is a lifeguard stand.
Oh, that's great.
Like the coolest thing you'd ever see. Okay. But, if you, again, it's funny now I'm left-handed. So when I tend to do a Docent tour, I'm sort of going towards the left, and, we're not going to be able to, in the short amount of time, go over every little piece. But, one of the first things, the first place I normally go to is the Buckminster Fuller Fly's Eye Dome. Now, if you haven't seen this is not a little piece of sculpture. This, this almost is reminiscent of the Unisphere you would see driving on the LIE by Flushing Meadow. Not that big, but the scale is enormous, Esperanza.
Yes.
And having done many a Docent tour, especially with the kids, everyone tends to gravitate. They go in there, they draw, they write poetry, or they just be. But what I've always found extraordinary about, and this is, again, a design element of Longhouse, Esperanza, you leave that area. Now, this thing is massive. We can't express enough how large it is.
I think it's like 33 feet high, at least.
Yeah, enormous.
And a sphere. So,
and it's a sphere and it's round. So it even appears bigger. Yet when you walk away from it, you don't see it again.
It's true. Yeah.
I mean, you go on.
It's all a play of perspectives. Yeah.
It's all a play of perspectives. Nice way of putting it. And you walk to other parts of the property. Now, look, if you stuck this in my 0.6 of an acre, this thing would dominate my house, no matter where I put it. He placed it in such a way between the curving pathways and the landscape and the hemlocks and everything else. Esperanza, is it fair to say that this 15.4 acres almost feels like 1,500 acres at some certain points when you're on this land?
There's an expansiveness and sort of an intimacy. There's a play between that, which reminds me a little of Frank Lloyd Wright as well, speaking of architecture. And so those architectural, roots of Jack's are not lost in this whole enterprise. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, completely. And you continue walking. And again, I mean, every single part of this place you walk, there's something to see and something out of the ordinary. I go beyond that and I'll wrap around the hemlocks on the other side of the Fly's Eye Dome. And I'll often tell, the group I'm with, always remember there's always something around the corner at Longhouse, wherever you go. And I ultimately take them into the Albee Amphitheater, which is, you talk about digging a hole and building a hill. This was in reverse. He dug the hole, and made the hills also. And it's evocative of the dunescape, sort of, in the sense that it's a rolling kind of hill, except you go into a depression.
Right.
But there's ultimately a piece of sculpture or something to rest your eyes on. And
yes, because let's not forget the sculpture that is all through the garden.
This is, we should mention that
it's a sculpture garden.
It's a sculpture garden. I mean, I think last year, if I'm not mistaken, there was some 80 some odd pieces of sculpture,
Yeah, well, there are at least 60 on permanent display for sure. Yeah. And then and this, again, what you said, like, I like the idea of this around the bend, you will find, that's how it is with the sculpture, because there would always be a new location, things that are permanent. Yes, there are some things that, like the Bucky Fuller, it's not going to be moved.
Right.
And it's in a perfect place. But then there are other things that just pop up somewhere.
That's a great point to bring out.
From one month to another, from one season to another.
The place is always being rethought.
Yes.
Recurated, if
just
you
as
will.
the garden. Yeah, because the garden, just as it is ever changing.
It's always a work in progress. I've always said that, especially about a garden. Garden things live and die.
Right. Exactly. Plants fail. They survive.
Exactly. You pamper, you love, you do everything, and it doesn't survive. And then something you ignore grows to 20 feet.
Thrives. Yes.
You never know in a garden, but that's such an important point. And then you extend beyond that. And there's a stand that, this is like almost a Longhouse off radar. I always tell
completely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I know what you're going to say.
I'm going. You know where I'm going. And you go beyond the amphitheater, and he's got a stand of California redwoods.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It just, and again, now this is not native to this part of the country. From what I heard from the horticulturist on the staff, he bought these as 10-footers. Now, they're certainly not as giant as a California redwood, where you can't even see the top of it, but they're big.
Oh, yeah.
And, they are growing.
Yes.
Thriving to me.
Yes.
Maybe not my lifetime, but my children's and grandchildren's. I mean, these things, who knows how high they're going to go, So really extraordinary. We do have to start wrapping this up.
Yes.
Because
I was so sad.
It is sad. I mean, this could be a 10-part episode. I could talk about this for hours
it's
on
so
end.
True.
But I think we just have to start wrapping up Esperanza with, again, if you haven't visited, and this is not a PR piece for Longhouse by any means, this is legitimate enthusiasm. If you live on the East End, first of all, this place is worth a trip from anywhere, as far as I'm concerned. It's
it's a destination, and certainly, a global destination.
You can't even describe what we're describing.
Talk about under the radar, by the way.
Totally under the radar. The amphitheater, and again, I'll go to the Red Garden for just a second. He created the Red Garden, a series of azaleas. Talk about repurposing, taking fallen timber, creating a line, painting it red, focusing with a piece at the end of this red garden that your eyes rest on. He actually transplanted these azaleas from Roundhouse and whatnot. Thrifty, economical, the whole bit. One of the
many themes, consistent themes. Yeah,
we can't. It's a place that has to be seen to be believed.
Yes.
And because there is a surprise around every corner. We haven't even discussed the Yoko Ono chessboard and everything else. There's just no time, to get to it.
No, because it actually really does have to be experienced.
It has to be experienced to be believed. But the point of the story is 80 pieces of sculpture, a world-class garden that really wasn't intended to be a botanical garden, just again, like textiles, a three-dimensional garden of shape, texture, light. But the takeaway is not the sculptural elements and the garden. The takeaway is Jack.
Yes.
That you had a person, an innovator, there's an expression we've heard a million times, thinking outside the box. This was the original thinking outside the box. Individual.
Yeah. And I would cap that all with, this was his gift it was his gift of creating this, but it was his gift that he made to our community, because that was, again, his purpose, his intention from the beginning
was to be exactly
that. There aren't enough accolades to describe the value of what he's done in that regard.
And we do have to, we're going to close with this, but any school, any child goes on those grounds for free.
Yes.
And gets passes for his parents or guardians, her parents, guardians, to bring home, to go to revisit the site. Honestly, for me, I'm going to go right out and say it, one of the greatest visionaries, and certainly in my lifetime.
Yes.
And someone that probably doesn't get the accolades and the credit he really deserves, Esperanza.
I agree. And I encourage everyone, if you haven't been there, go. And
I beg
if you haven't ever heard of Jack Lenor Larsen, research. Thank you, Irwin.
Thank you, Esperanza. We're going to leave it there but yes, visit. And Esperanza, we should sign off and just talk for another couple of hours about Jack Lenor Larsen.
Great.
But for now, thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.